What's up, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. Or, of course, if you're watching on our growing YouTube channel, that is Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me, as he always does, our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And Andrew here for another episode of the THI podcast, having a little bit different of a conversation. I want to emphasize that word because what this podcast is really going to be is not scripted. There's no planning that's going into this. We just want to kind of come on here and have a conversation about kind of the program and some things you asked Mac a couple of days ago and some of the things we even hit on after the Duke game during our Three Things video in terms of the fans and in terms of some of the vibes you picked up in the press box as well. So I want to start off with this because I think this definitely feeds into the topic of what we're going to be talking about. You asked Mac a question after the Duke game, kind of talking about Trey Morrison's interception and how that kind of changed the vibe of the team, for lack of a better word. And I thought Mac had an interesting answer where he kind of said, yeah, the team a little bit tight going into the game. It kind of felt, and I think this was a direct quote, kind of felt like they had let the fans down based on kind of, how, especially how the Georgia Tech game went, which of course wasn't a positive result for the Tar Heels, not only just getting beat, but the way in which they got beat down in Atlanta. And even some going back to the Virginia Tech game, which we'll hit on a little bit later on in the podcast. But you asked him kind of a follow-up question on Monday as well that I'll let you kind of go into a little bit more detail about what his response was in terms of that. But I thought it was an interesting quote from Mac on Saturday with the fact that the players felt like they had let the fans down because of some of the expectations coming into the season. And we hit it on our Three Things, but I really felt that. I was actually sitting in the stands on Saturday, and I kind of felt that vibe as well in some ways, a little bit more sense of frustration, a little bit less sense of optimism for how good this team can be, especially when you look back into a month and a half ago when fan was just sky high excited about, how good this team can be. So I know it's kind of a lot to hit on, and we're obviously just going to have a conversation about this. But for everybody that doesn't know, kind of give them maybe a little bit more of a background on what you asked Mac on Monday and kind of how that feeds into what we're talking about here.
Well, from my vantage point up in the press box, when Trey picked up that fumble, ran 63 yards for a touchdown, I just sensed that it totally changed the disposition of the team, which I think is a bigger word than vibe because I think it goes deeper. A vibe can kind of go off and on. The disposition is more fortified. And I just got the sense that they got back some juice, but it was a little bit more than just getting back juice. I mean, they only had 2 defensive touchdowns since Mac came back, 2 in 30 games. And then the Storm Duck pick 6 in the Military Bowl. So, and they played like it afterward. The defense was hype. The offense had some success in spite of the third quarter, and they ended up beating a rival 38-7, a club, and did some fantastic things defensively when you look at the statistics and everything. So, Max, we talked about what Max said a little bit in our Three Things, and it got me thinking a little bit more. And I've been thinking about this for a while, actually, because, Jacob, I've heard more from people in the last couple of weeks, contacting me through. People get a hold of my email. They get a hold of my phone number.
Like, how'd you get that?
Messages. Yeah, I mean, I have to. Who's this? Like, I have a macro for who's this?
Yeah, exactly.
On my phone, and macros are like an old thing. I think I don't know if I should be saying stuff like old time like that.
I know what you're saying.
My age. Yeah, I did computer stuff in the '90s when macros were a thing.
Yeah, back when they were coming in hot.
Well, anyhow, I've heard a ton from people, and all of it's negative. And
I've seen it too.
There was even a thread on our message board started after the Duke game. Yeah, they won 38-7 over Duke, and there was a ... and like 300 things that followed. Mac hit on that on Saturday or Monday because I asked him in his weekly press conference a little bit more about that, alluding to the fact that you said this after the game, which he brought up, but I don't think it's any secret. And I said, look, the kids, there was a time when coaches would try to keep the newspapers away from the team. You can't do that now. They see and hear everything that's going on. And so you can't hide anything from them. The kids know. So the staff has to talk to them about that stuff when you're struggling. And sometimes maybe when a team's doing really well, you have to as well, because you don't want to get too high and get too big headed. And he said, yeah, he's had to have conversations. There's a delicate balance in how you deal with that because of the reaction of the fans. And the reality is they're 5 games into year 3. And if you peel away Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech, There's so many things going extremely well and in the right direction in this program. But the average fan doesn't pay attention on a daily basis. They don't see hear every drum beat like we do because it's our jobs. So they're not thinking about recruiting. They're not thinking about all those different elements that go into what props a program up and makes it sustainable, which is what they're in the process of doing. They see, oh my gosh, that was a mess in Blacksburg. How are they not ready to play? And then they look at Georgia Tech, say, good gracious, 8 sacks. What is wrong with this team?
Yeah.
That's what we hear. I'll respond by saying, yeah, okay, you're right. The offensive line has been a mess. They've allowed 22 sacks, 5 more than anybody in the ACC. Got to get that fixed. I talked about the running between the tackles after the Georgia State game, which was a problem. And some people poo-pooed it and said, they won 59-17. But that was still an issue. And now that has been exposed and people are really hitting on it. A week ago, everyone wanted to fire Jay Bateman.
It fluctuates every week.
So what we're getting at here, and one of the things we want to talk about and get across to some people that we're seeing from our end, is I have heard more from people over the last couple of weeks with just vitriol in some respects than I did the hype and excitement in August when people were thinking CFP and Heisman. Mm-hmm. And I think that's interesting. So one of the things I said on our 3 things video after the game, and you and I have talked about it a couple of times since then, including 20 minutes ago, just kind of fleshing it out. But I believe that the difference between the football fan hopping off the bandwagon, and I believe that a huge percentage of fan base has leapt off this season. A lot jumped after Virginia Tech, but they thought, you know what, the goals are still in place. Let's hang through this. They put 59 up 2 straight weeks. Let's hang through this. And I think a lot of them just jumped off, not for good, but for a while after Atlanta. It's because Carolina football hasn't rewarded the fans over the course of time. They haven't rewarded that loyalty. They haven't rewarded that dedication. I know some people who said, I'm going to the Duke game. I don't feel the same way about Duke and football as I do basketball, but I feel like it's an obligation, so I'm going to go. Mm-hmm. Basketball has a history of rewarding the fans. They've had some tough losses. They have tough stretches during the course of seasons, but fans know, okay, Roy or Dean or whoever is going to fix it. And there's also that tournament at the end of the road. We can get on a roll and make something happen and end up winning championships. I mean, Roy's last championship team in 2017 had 7 losses.
Exactly.
So there were 7 times the fans felt dejected, but they also knew, okay, we're going to get this right. They don't have the same feeling for football. And we're seeing it on our end. I think Max senses it, when he hit on his answer talking about how people are a little bit angry now and fans will go on, forms of social media where you really don't know who they are. And you could really get away with either
say whatever you want,
interloper from another fan base or just a real disgruntled fan. It's out there, it's real, and the program is dealing with it now. People have jumped off big time, and I'm not sure what it's going to take to get them back on. Anything that they have lined up here in 2021 season, I'm not sure at what point they'll start climbing back on.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what you're saying. I mean, I was actually talking to someone I'm related to who's been a, diehard Carolina football fan for, since they were young, basically in their, 50s now. And, one of the things that we had a conversation about was you talked about Carolina fans jumping ship pretty quickly when it comes to football. To me, I think it's always kind of been like that. I mean, I'm not saying always is every single year, but I would say the majority is, there's this expectation, like you mentioned, around Carolina football that basketball, you've been rewarded. You can look up and you can see those banners that you've been rewarded. It's a museum in there, basically, of success, for lack of a better word. And you go on the football side and it's just not like that. So when the team loses a game like they shouldn't lose, you can say Virginia Tech wasn't a game, but I think Virginia Tech was a very, very tough game when you look at the whole things considered. But Georgia Tech, for instance, when you lose a game in that fashion, when you were sold something, for lack of a better word, as a fan, that's how fans feel when this team is hyped up. Yeah. You're sold something, right? Lack of a better word.
They
were sold on this team.
The program sold it and the media sold it.
Exactly. And we as a media entity, we're obviously covering the team during the fall and covering the thing in spring ball. And, at the end of the day, we're just reporting kind of what we're being told from the coaches and from the players and also what we're seeing with our own eyes when we have those opportunities to see it with our own eyes in person. Yeah. So, this team was, for lack of this fans, were sold something of, okay, we want to compete for the Coastal. We want to win the Coastal flat out. We want to win the ACC championship. We've got a Heisman candidate here at quarterback. Not only that, we have CFP ambitions as well. And when you lose that first game to Virginia Tech, you're going to lose some people because, you saw it as well, probably more than I did. The reaction from the fans after that game on social media was unbelievable. We had not only us getting slandered by fans, but other media entities that covered Carolina just getting absolutely bashed in terms of, hey, you guys told me this team was better than that. Well, why the heck did they go up to Blacksburg and lose and perform like they did and, only scored 10 points, for lack of a better word? We received a lot of flack from that.
Yeah.
And then you kind of transition that. I was actually, just real quickly before I let you talk, I was actually in the stands. I've been in the stands for 2 games this year and been in the press box for the other ones, but I was in the stands for the Georgia State game. And that optimism was still there. There was there was a little bit of that hangover from Virginia Tech where, it wasn't a full stadium, which you're not really expecting from a Georgia State game in a lot of respects, just because of the opponent. But I felt like there was a little bit more optimism there. I really, really did. And you could feel that in the air, being in the stadium and talking to some fans that, I was talking to along the way. Then obviously the Georgia Tech game happens. And I mentioned this during our 3 things. I was in the stands for the Duke game last weekend. And that vibe had just completely shifted. The optimism had kind of left. The excitement for what this team could potentially be had kind of left, because at the end of the day, I've talked about this with some people. You lose 2 games like they have to the opponents that Carolina has. Not only is the Coastal, and it's not out of play, but does it make it so much harder to compete and win the Coastal? CFP's long gone, and you've only played 4 games. So what these fans, for lack of a better word, were sold in the beginning of the year, I think they look at it and say, okay, we're 4 games in, and all that's basically gone out the window now, and we're struggling to beat these teams. So I do get it when you look at the history of Carolina football and how fans have kind of consistently, no matter what, Carolina's just never been able to get over that hump and win a national championship like they have in basketball many times, or just be a consistent ACC Coastal winner like they have in the ACC in terms of basketball. And not only basketball, you look at Carolina as a university.
Yeah,
they are very good in most of their athletic programs. It's not just basketball.
Yeah, but people don't really
find success.
With all due respect to the other sports, I don't think people care too much. I think the average sports fan who you see wearing the gear,
it's football.
They could go win this in field hockey. I don't think anyone would really. I'm not being disrespectful. It's just the way things are.
Yeah,
I think we're looking at a fool me once, fool me twice, fool me 3 times type thing here.
I agree.
So I don't think people even care right now. They're not thinking about, boy, they could still win. How could they win the Coastal? What are the the scheduling scenarios? Who does Virginia Tech have to play? Who's Georgia Tech have to play? All that kind of stuff. I don't really think people are thinking about that right now. I think that they feel wounded, and I think it's taken them a while to get off the mat. And you're right about Virginia Tech. I actually sense more vitriol after Georgia Tech.
I did, yeah.
Because Virginia Tech we talked about it. That was explained away. It was a bad performance, but bad performances happen. Especially in an opener on the road, there was a tough place to go. But Georgia Tech was inexcusable on multiple levels, and I guarantee you, every member of the coaching staff would agree with that. You should not go down there and get pummeled by that team. I don't care that Georgia Tech was competitive against Clemson. Clemson's not that good this year. Look at what Georgia Tech did a week after beating Carolina. Got completely massacred at home.
42-17 at halftime, I think, something crazy like that.
Yeah, and Kenny Pickett just threw all over. And they weren't exactly draping themselves all over Kenny Pickett like they were Sam Howell the week before. And it's not just losing, but it's how you lose. The defense gave up 313 yards in the second half. Jeremiah Gemmel said they didn't really prepare for Jeff Sims. Things like that really eat away at the fans. So when you're built up and you have this expectation, then suddenly you feel super let down. I think the other achievements that are still at play don't really matter right now because you have to recover. The wounds have to heal.
Yeah.
And I think the wounds are still there. And I think the other part of this is Max talked a lot about, I don't know why we're not doing well on the road, why we do well at home there. I was reading an FSU preview on warchant.com, which is in our network, and go to that site. It's a phenomenal site.
Fantastic.
A lot of the content is free. And if you're a subscriber to us, you could read their front page stuff that's premium. And they were talking about how Carolina has been, quote unquote, dominant at home. and they don't care. They're not evaluating UNC and what they've been in Blacksburg or Atlanta because it doesn't matter to them because they're going to be in Chapel Hill. They've averaged out scoring 3 opponents 52-21 at home, but they've been really bad on the road. So I think part of the diminished excitement during this stretch of games, and you would think Florida State, Miami, Notre Dame would in October would have the fan base buzzing. It's because they've kind of put themselves in a position now where, well, what do you have really to prove to the average fan? Well, you've already established that you don't win on the road and you're dominant at home. So if you're dominant over Duke at home, which they were, and you're dominant over Florida State at home, which might happen, and you're dominant over a really messed up Miami situation right now at home, what does that prove?
Yeah.
What does it prove? You were dominant over Virginia in many ways, Georgia State, and then you go get throttled at a crappy Georgia Tech team. So I think people need to see the long version of this play out. And even Notre Dame, they just lost at home to Cincinnati. They've only looked good in one game. That was over Wisconsin in basically the fourth quarter. So even if they go to Notre Dame and win, people are going to find ways to diminish that victory. Then you come home and play Wake, and Wake could be undefeated by then, but they're still Wake.
Yeah,
people are not going to get jazzed up over Wake Forest. Then you go to Pitt, which I think is a really good team. And I think Kenny Pickett right now has been the best quarterback in the ACC, but they lost at home to Western Michigan and gave up 44 points. Then you have Wofford, and then you go to NC State. Well, I mean, maybe NC State will get people fired up, but the win over Clemson doesn't have a lot of bite to it right now because Clemson just isn't that kind of team. They're not typical Clemson. So then you go to the ACC championship game. Let's just, look ahead, right? Let's say they do that. Who are they going to play from the other side that would make people think, yeah, okay, they finally arrived? You would have to go to the Peach Bowl and beat somebody good from the SEC, like the third best SEC team, to even give the fans something that they could chew on and say, okay, a lot of that stuff we were told back in August might actually be coming to fruition. Because they're only going to look at the surface, and that's what the surface shows. You and I see a lot more, Jacob. And we could do a separate podcast on, okay, guys, let's pull the curtain away, disregard what's in front of the curtain, and give 5 reasons why this program is absolutely heading in the right direction. It would be an easy podcast.
Yeah.
I don't think fans want to see that. Let me sidebar very quickly.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Baltimore Orioles fan, which is a painful experience. Okay.
Gotta be.
And they just lost 110 games this year. And they've been terrible for 4 or 5 years during the rebuild, but they have the number 1 farm system in baseball. They've got potential studs that can be called up at some point next year, and the nose might be turning in the right direction. On the surface, they're giving up 12 runs in an inning sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's unbearable, right? But behind the surface, positive things are happening. So you have to have a big enough vision and allow yourself to see beyond what's in front of you to see that the program is headed in the right direction. And I think a lot of fans are struggling with that because they thought the fruits of their labor were right in front of them. And they're not, because they're still in that P word. They're still in the process.
Yeah.
And the payoff might be 22 or even 23.
Yeah. And that's something we even hit on during the preseason of like, I think this, we thought this team had a chance to be really good, but we also kept kind of reminding people that I don't think this is anywhere near the peak. I think the next 22, 23, 24 is really when you can expect this program to maybe take it up to another level when you look at how they're recruiting some of the guys they're bringing in and some of the younger guys that are there now that you would expect will still be there playing a prominent part for the Tar Heels in a couple of years and be that much more experienced. So I think it's interesting because I want to go back 2 years ago when Matt came in. We talked about this a little bit after our 3 Things video off camera we did after the Duke game. And we were talking about how good the crowds were, that year and just the optimism and how people showed up no matter what. Obviously, Carolina had a solid year for a program that was coming off of what they had come off of. Just winning some games was a refresher, for lack of a better word, for these fans, because they had been basically about as low as you can get from a fandom perspective with how bad they were the last 2 years of Fedora's era, just in terms of winning games. But there was just this huge sense of optimism here because people were, Mac was back. There was an exciting element of what this team can do and how he was already recruiting. And you got Sam Howell, this star-studded freshman quarterback, coming in and lighting things up. And you've already got talent on the team that, Larry Fedora had recruited that, developed, like De'Ami Brown, Michael Carter, Javonte Williams, that were kind of getting into their groove and showing just how good they could be. Hence why they're in the NFL now. But now, obviously last year hurt because there's no fans, but Carolina had a solid year. I think. I know it didn't end probably how they wanted to in terms of the loss in the Orange Bowl, but it was progress again, right? And
They were
then,
competitive, and with
yes,
the guys leaving, people expect them to get blown out. They weren't. So they're like, hey, okay,
pretty good. Yeah. And then like,
we'll take it. We'll take 8-4 and Orange
Exactly.
Bowl and all that stuff.
Yeah.
They wanted to take the next giant step.
Yeah.
And through 5 games, they haven't done that.
Exactly. And I think it goes back to what
They're having a tough time understanding everything else that's involved.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. And I think it goes back to, like you said, the expectations that were put on the team before the season. Cause like I said, we got bashed after the Virginia Tech game and all the other media outlets did.
After Georgia Tech.
Yeah. For overhyping this team. But I've told people, I said, guys, like, I don't have anything to do with these top 25 rankings. Carolina was a number 10 team in the country coming into the year. It wasn't just us. Like,
no, but in fairness,
that.
but in fairness, we all thought this team would be better than they.
Oh yeah, and I think they should.
Now, I did say on our preview podcast they were going to lose a game. They have no business losing it. We don't expect them to lose. I even threw out Georgia Tech. I thought maybe they were going to lose Georgia Tech because, and I've done a bunch of radio interviews and stuff and some other podcasts where I said, look, until North Carolina shows and North Carolina does it, it's hard to project North Carolina doing it in football. In basketball, it's not. Hubert Davis is in his first year. They got a lot of players. I'm sitting there at practice last week, and I turned to Noah and Brandon. I said, would you be surprised this club's in the Final Four? If Caleb Love plays really well? Of course not. In football, it's a different beast because if they haven't crossed that line before, and I'll use a saying I've used for years, and I talked about this in 2015 when they won 11 straight when Fedora was coach. North Carolina football has bumped its head against the ceiling in a lot of different decades under a lot of different coaches, which is why so many people call it a sleeping giant. It's a program you can win it. The 40s did it. They did it in the early 70s with Dooley. They did it under Crum. They did it under Mac Brown. They're doing it again. They were on the verge of doing that under Butch Davis. And that brings me to the other point too, by the way, and I'll get to that in a second, but they bumped their head on the ceiling, but they could never break through.
You never got over that hump.
Never able to just bust through and just,
we're here.
Guys, we're here and we're going to hang around for a while. A lot of other programs that have risen up from similar circumstances have been able to hang around. Oregon hung around. Colorado in the late 80s, early 90s hung around for a while. They were very relevant, got a national championship out of it. If Colorado can do it 30 years ago, I know it's 30 years ago, they still did it. If Oregon can do it, North Carolina's got a much better regional recruiting base to draw from than Oregon does. Oregon has that brand, but North Carolina's got its brand too. I guarantee when people turn on TV and see a team in neon green and see a team in Carolina blue, the average sports fan knows who the team in blue is, but they're not sure who the other team is in neon green. So my point is they can do that, but they haven't bumped their head. They haven't broken through the ceiling. And back to the point I was going to make about Butch in 2010. I was at the spring game in 2010. They had 30,000 people there. Mm-hmm. The excitement and optimism was higher then than it was even in 97 with Mac.
Yeah.
But they were let down. Mm-hmm. They've had 2 points of significant optimism since Mac left. Mm-hmm. All right. Butch in 2010 and this year. And you could go to 2016 as well. Yeah. They returned a lot of guys from the 2015 team. Trubisky, 4 weeks in the season, people are saying that guy might be the number 1 pick. And the staff knew he was going to be really, really good. They knew he was going to be really good. And they had an opportunity to do something special. And then they clunked at the end of that season as well. You've got to understand the wound nature of the fan base where things have been built up, but they never scale that hurdle. They never scale that mountain. Mm-hmm. And they're dealing with it right now. I still think the mountains are in front of them that can be scaled down the road. And honestly, if you look at this year's season, if they protect Sam better, run the ball a little bit better between the tackles, and one other receiver steps up and gets separation. If Chopper Brown runs better routes and catches the ball, he's a big play kind of guy. They can win the games in front of them. They can be there in Charlotte in December celebrating hardware that in football this program hasn't brought home since 1980. Mm-hmm. They can still achieve things that we're asking them to achieve. We as media saying, you want me to believe, I got to see stuff, as the fan base is dying for them to achieve. So a lot of that's still in front of them. But it might take that to get people back on, because when you look at traffic, not just our site, the other sites, you look at the video traffic of the interviews. When we do our preview podcast for 3 things, it has dropped significantly since Virginia Tech, and especially since Georgia Tech.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
With Duke last week, I write a victory bell piece and people like, whatever.
Yeah.
So it's the team's responsibility to get it back. We have a couple of interns on our staff, Noah and Brandon. One of the things I teach them, just like I taught you a few years ago, you know what? They're like, well, how do you determine what you're going to write? Or do you think about what you're going to write before a game? I said, no. I let the team that I cover, whether it's when I covered hockey, all the different pro sports, cover basketball, football, whatever it is, the team I'm covering, I let them dictate what I'm going to write. They don't tell me, hey, Jay, we want you to write this. Their performance, the way that they lead into games, the way they handle things determines what I write. And there are a lot of damn good journalists that cover North Carolina. And so a lot of us go about it pretty much the same way. And North Carolina fans are fortunate with a lot of different sites. The newspapers that cover it, some really good, top shelf people that are covering this stuff. So they're very fortunate that they get the kind of coverage they get. And we determine what we're going to write based on how they play. They do it for us. So that's what the fans get. So when we write something positive, they come back and say, what the hell? When we write something really negative, they want to just jump on it. There's a piling on mentality. And we've gotten that with the sacks, but especially with the running between the tackles. As I go back to what I said 15 minutes ago, I started talking about that after Georgia State. And some people are like, dude, they just won 59-17. And some people are like, holy crap, I'm concerned. Well, the concern was legitimate because they're still not really doing a great job.
It's evident. Yeah.
So we'll see. So I evaluate the Duke game the same way I'm going to evaluate Florida State.
Yeah.
Protect Sam, run the ball well between the tackles. And I think the defensive stuff will eventually take care of itself because we said all along throughout August, the defense is going to be a lot better in November than it is September.
Yeah.
And it was phenomenal on Saturday against Duke. We'll see how it is moving forward. But I think the defense is going to need to be really good every week because this could be a situation where the offense is not really good every week. So the defense has to win games when the offense isn't, taking it off the top of the defense or busting off 63-yard touchdowns. So, so it is what it is.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating. People I know that are Carolina fans, when I do my 6 miles in the neighborhood, there's a guy that I see every once in a while I walk with, and he's like, what the hell? There's a few other people that are the same way. The people that know I'm a Carolina fan, I don't hear, or Carolina writer, and I don't hear from them very often, and they want to know what's going on, and their questions are laced in negativity.
Yeah. 100%.
I didn't hear from them in August. Mm-hmm. I didn't hear from, we wrote about Sam and the Heisman.
Yeah, definitely.
Hear from now.
Definitely not.
Hey, no, you're near the program. What are you seeing? Give me something more to make me angrier. It's like they want something to feed the anger because they're so used to it in football.
Yeah, and I'll just add this to it. We won't keep it going too much longer because we could talk about this forever. But I'll add this to it. It's like any fandom, and I see it. I'm a huge Manchester United fan. Played soccer my whole life. Huge Manchester United fan. Watch all their stuff. And long story short, when I came and really started following them, it's funny, when I really, really became a fan, it's the last 7 years have been one of their worst periods in the last 50, right? But what I've seen with that fan base and what I see in some ways with the Carolina fan base and what you see in any sport, it's not just these two, it's any fandom with any sports team. You'll see this is a lot of fans feel this sense of entitlement where you lost that game, you let me down, I'm not supporting you anymore. And I get that in some ways, but sports is meant to be fun. Being a fan is meant to be fun. The process of this is meant to be fun. And there is certain groups of fan bases that in some ways, I think it's like their whole happiness of their whole life is determined on whether or not some 18, 19, and 20-year-old kids go out there and perform like they expect them and they feel obligated that they should for them, right? And that's just the beauty and the craziness, for lack of a better word, of being a fan of any sports. That's what makes it so unique, what makes it so fun. And what makes 55,000 people show up in a stadium to watch it, like I said, watch a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-olds run around and hit each other for 3 hours. At the grand scheme, it's just it's an interesting way to look at it. But the last thing I'll say about it, just to wrap this whole thing up, I really think that what I've learned is this fan base, what's happened in the past, how they've ever been able just to kind of break through that ceiling. For me, it's kind of, this is just the same thing again, every year. And I'll also add this, I think why it's been maybe a little bit different or maybe a little bit more extreme, for lack of a better word, this year, like we talked about earlier, is because I think the expectations on this team were so high and what they were being sold was such a thing that Carolina football fans, just for lack of a better term, were just not used to having And like I said, 4 weeks into the season, you're sitting there at 2-2, like, all right, well, I guess what we were sold ain't going to happen. So I really think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, as a journalist, I don't root for them to win or lose. No. I've covered a lot of teams where I felt bad for the kids when they've lost, and pro athletes, more so the college ones. And like in 2017, I felt really good for those Carolina kids.
How could you not?
I was in that locker room 15 minutes after Chris Jenkins' shot went through the year before the title game, and I saw the tears. I stood there waiting for Bryce Johnson for 7 minutes to compose himself so he could answer questions. And those are special memories because it's very human. I've said
human
before,
element.
The most human experience I've ever had in this business is going into a locker room of teams just lost the NCAA tournament. But so I really enjoyed those kids winning the next year for them, and for this Carolina fan base, and for the people that invest themselves in the program. And clearly, Mac Brown has invested himself. He got the program close, but then left. He came back for unfinished business. He wants to give this fan base. He wants to achieve something he knows can be done. He knows it can be done in this program. And when they do that, and I still am confident that North Carolina is going to have that success. They're going to break through that ceiling under Mac at some point here in the next few years.
I think so too.
I will enjoy seeing the fan base's reaction to that. As a journalist, I don't root for it, but I do think it's going to happen eventually. And it's going to be really neat to see the fans react to finally the reward for all these years, the reward for being close a lot, and the reward for putting up with some real crap for a long time. Now, let's face it, since Mac left, they haven't won more than 8 games except 2015.
Yeah.
When they won 11 straight.
Just not great.
Even last year's team is as good as people felt about it. They still went 8-4.
Mm-hmm.
But let's remember, they're 18-12 since Mac returned. They were 6-21 in Larry's last 27 games.
It's a lot better. Yeah.
And those wins were over FCS and win over ODU. And they somehow Pat Narduzzi allowed his team to lose to North Carolina a couple of times in those years. So they owned Pitt for some reason.
Yeah, that one out. Makes no sense.
So I totally get why the fans are upset, and I totally understand. I think why it's going to take a lot, why they're so quick to jump off. But there's still a lot of football to be played. I still think that the trajectory of this program is still very much in great shape. I wrote a column 2 days before the Virginia Tech game saying that they are way ahead of schedule. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're way ahead of schedule anymore because part of that was I thought we'd see more than we have on the field. So I was wrong about that. That's okay. I would hate to be right all the time. It wouldn't be fun.
Yeah, it's no fun. Right? All the time. Wouldn't get flack from people on Twitter.
I've accepted that reality a long time ago. And I think that's what makes it fun and interesting to cover as a journalist because of that, the unknown. That's kind of why this stretch of home games is kind of, we really want to see them in South Bend. We really want to see them in Pittsburgh. We really want to see them in Raleigh to really see how much growth this team has had, how much growth the program has had, and being able to handle situations that they clearly haven't been that great at.
Yeah. And right before we wrap it up, I just thought about this too. I mean, I think we haven't really hit on this too, but I think recruiting's played a factor in the expectations and the reaction from the fan bases as well, because if you look at how good Carolina has recruited off the field since Mac's come in, and now you're, like you said, you're sitting here where you've got a 3-2 team. It was 2-2 at one point, losing games they shouldn't lose and all that kind of stuff. I think that plays a factor into it as well when you're being so successful on the recruiting trail. And obviously a lot of those recruits that are coming in, especially over the last year or two, are not really playing as much and will be playing a little bit more.
People shouldn't expect them to, Jacob.
Exactly. No, they shouldn't.
And I'd be willing to bet you that the fans of the more traditionally successful programs, I won't even go Alabama and Ohio State because they're on a different level, right? But maybe the fans of Florida or
there's higher level.
But the second tier of those kind of programs, LSU is, they're obviously a very good program. Yeah. The fans there expect success. They don't expect freshmen to come in and play right away. They don't even expect second years to be big time contributors, especially right now when you think about the bulk of the most talented kids on the roster are first or second year guys. And the second year guys didn't have a normal year last year. They were doing workouts on Zoom with backpacks filled with, ice and books, trying to work out like that. Mm-hmm. They didn't have the normal year. So for a lot of them, this is their first full, complete 1 year cycle of normal college football. So the best, most talented players in the program are much younger ones. They have a lot of seasoning they still need. They've played 2 road games in front of fans. The first one was in Blacksburg. So, and I do think some people are a little disappointed because some of the older kids maybe haven't played as well as they expected. But you got to understand, it's 11 guys on the field. On the offensive line, there's 5 offensive linemen. If one guy doesn't handle his assignment properly, he can screw up everything. Especially if it's a pulling guard or if it's a center who gets pushed back at the point of attack and screws up the pulling guard or tackle or something like that. A lot of things can go wrong if one guy gets beat. So I think that's a really good point that you brought up. Give it time. Let things marinate. Yeah. Let them learn from some of these disappointments and use that stuff to build a stronger fortification to the program, which I think is in the process of happening. Although I don't think people that are watching from a more of a distant view can see so much right now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think Rome wasn't.
Although, by the way, 38-7 over Duke.
Yeah.
Holding them 2-15 on third down.
It's a good win.
Not letting them. Duke didn't run one play inside the red zone. Think about Larry's last game against Duke when the 11s ran all over him.
Yeah.
There is evidence on the field as well. Plenty of evidence on the field. It's just not what people thought. It's not as much as what people thought.
Definitely. No, 100%. Yeah, I think
so we beat this horse in the ground.
Yeah, I'm about to say, I think it's a good place to wrap. We could sit here and talk about this for hours. I mean, it's a fascinating conversation to have too, because I think there's a lot of different perspectives, and from people we know to people to be in the press box, to being sitting in stands, to just talking to people. I mean, there's a lot of different perspectives, but yeah, I think we could sit out here and talk about this all day. So let's go ahead and wrap this one up. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Like I said, a little bit different of a podcast topic, but I think it was something that needed to be talked about and kind of hit upon. And I think with your questions that you asked Mac over the past few days as well, I think it was a really appropriate time to kind of dive into it a little bit deeper. So yeah, that's a fascinating subject, and obviously we'll continue to see how the season plays out, and maybe we'll have another conversation about this in 4 or 5 games, and it's a completely different one. You just never know.
I think let's go ahead and do it. Let's talk after they got Miami or FSU, Miami, Notre Dame, Wake Forest, and Pitt, and that's a 3 games in 12 days.
Yeah, I think it'd be fascinating to talk about
Thursday night. They got a basketball game next day. How about that Saturday? We'll do a podcast.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that.
Let's talk about it. After the next 5, we'll revisit this and kind of see what the message is.
I like it. I love it, man. Let's do it. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Thank you guys for watching. As always, make sure you like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know every single time we upload. Make sure you check us out on TarHeelIllustrated.com as well. You can find the link in the description below, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks.